Hello everybody, this is Jason Heires. This is my Essential Albums Volume 17. Today we're going to talk about someone that most people consider to be the greatest rock guitar player of all time. I'm not totally sold on that. I kind of think that he tends to be slightly overrated. I know that might get crucified me, but he died young, and everybody, when they die young, they kind of get lionized more than they might should. And the artist is Jimi Hendrix. The album is Electric Ladyland, and here's the cover. This album was released in 1968. It's the third album of the Jimi Hendrix Experience. The Jimi Hendrix Experience was a three-piece band that featured Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums. And this is probably the best of the Jimi Hendrix Experience albums. I would actually say this is Jimi Hendrix's best album. They seem to constantly manage to pull out more Jimi Hendrix albums out of the ether, and I know it's just a ploy to make more money. It's a little bit sad. Jimi Hendrix has been dead for a long time, and he is a great artist and has a great legacy, but we don't need new albums come out of the ether every single time somebody else in the family takes over the rights for the Jimi Hendrix catalog. So that's just kind of the thing. I'm just going to come out and say it. Now, I really like this album. It has a lot of really strong songs on it. It's probably most famous for two songs. The one is Voodoo Child Slight Return, which is just a masterpiece guitar workout, and a lot of people would say that that's a really unique guitar thing that nobody else really did. Buddy Guy and maybe like Albert King might take a little umbrage to that, but it is really impressive what he does there, and it's a very electrifying version of the blues, And then there's a really great cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower, where he takes All Along the Watchtower even to a further level, because he takes what's already really great lyrics and then accelerates the song musically into the stratosphere. So those are really great songs. Crosstown Traffic is another classic Jimi Hendrix song. I mean, this album is pretty good. A lot of multi-tracking for the guitar parts, which means that Jimi sometimes is recording 3, 4, 5, 6 different guitar parts at the same time. Like songs like Gypsy Eyes is a good example of this. But Jimi does a lot of stuff, and there's some pretty psychedelic and experimental stuff, like 1983, Merman, I Will Be. My dad thought it was called Moon Turns the Tides, and there's a little instrumental part at the very end of that song that is called Moon Turns the Tides. But 1983, A Merman I Will Be is the actual title of the song, and it's a fun song, Of course, we never became Merman in 1983, which is, a lot of guys, when they make future predictions in the 60s, came up a little short. We're not as far along as we'd like to be. Paul Kantner said that we were going to be in the, in a starship in 1990, and, of course, that never happened. But it's still fun. Jimi Hendrix is a great guitar player. This is a fun album. There is a studio called Electric Ladyland Studios, and it was named after this album. Jimi Hendrix bought the space in New York City, and it's been an active studio. It still records and makes albums today. It's been around as a lasting legacy. It used to be a nightclub that Jimi Hendrix bought, and they converted it over into a studio. There's also, not to be confused with Voodoo Child Slight Return, which is the bluesy high energy one. There's also a Voodoo Child, which is a very long jam session, and that one's kind of interesting because of the other musicians that are on that. Steve Winwood is on there. He plays keyboards. Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane plays bass on there. Of course, Jimi Hendrix plays guitar, and it's a pretty interesting jam session. It probably goes a little bit too long, but it's a product of its time. So Jimi Hendrix, Electric Ladyland is a truly great album, and it's definitely worth having. The biggest problem with all the Hendrix albums, and this one isn't as bad as some of the other ones, is the production could be a little bit better, and that's something where Hendrix albums hurt just a little bit. So you don't quite get as good of a sounding record in terms of the tracking. I mean, what Hendrix plays and what the rest of the band plays, like Mitch Mitchell is fantastic. Noel Redding is actually was a guitar player who converted over to bass, but he does a solid job. I mean, it's a good band and they made good records. Mitch Mitchell is probably one of the more underrated drummers from Britain. They had a really, in the late 60s, they had a really rich history of drummers, and there were just all kinds of really good drummers that came out of that period. You know, Ginger Baker, Mitch Mitchell, you know, Nick Mason from Pink Floyd, Keith Moon, John Bonham, just great, great drummers, all of them. I think that's probably going to wrap it up for today. I hope you enjoy this. Leave a comment if you got something to say. I appreciate you watching these videos, and have a good one.